Welcome to San Joaquin Spotlight, a public affairs program featuring conversations about life in the central San Joaquin Valley. This program is brought to you in partnership between KFSR 90.7 FM and CMAC Fresno. I'm your host, Sevag Tateosian. Today, I'm excited, but I'm excited at every show. I always say that, I know, but I'm excited to have Mr. Ron Genini in the studio today because Mr. Genini, you've heard from him before. He was my old history professor. He was my brother's old history professor. And he was my sister-in-law's old history professor. So Mr. Genini has been around education for a very long time, and he's our guest this week. Welcome back.
Hi, glad to be back, glad to be back.
So you were on months ago on
That's
the program talking about World War I and World War II.
And then again about the 4th of July.
And about the 4th of July.
Right.
So November is coming up, and November is a important month for several reasons. We have Thanksgiving.
Right.
And we have Veterans Day.
Right.
So before we talk about that, I want to talk about in the classroom. You spent how many years in the classroom?
35.
Congratulations.
Thank you. I'm still here.
And during these times, did you ever do anything in the classroom? I mean, was there any different things, maybe decorations or anything?
No, I didn't do that. You should remember that, Sevag.
I do.
I had a course. I taught it in order and went with that. Of course, I did recognize the holidays. I bring in treats at Halloween or Thanksgiving or right before Christmas vacation or at Easter time. I'd bring these things in. But as far as decorating or special emphasis, no, I didn't. Because that was more for elementary school, I thought, not for high school.
Do you miss being in the classroom? I mean, you were there 35 years. That's a long time.
No. I have taught at in the Osher program at Fresno State for older people like me. You emphasized old. But as far as going back to classroom teaching, no, it's not for me. It was, but there have been too many changes that I couldn't live with. And they wouldn't be able to live with me with either. So, just as well. But
and one last question. I mean, I always wondered why you never went to teach at Fresno State or become a professor or went to a graduate school. I mean, and I'm glad you stayed. By the way, for the record, I'm glad you stayed at Central because I think you taught and you brought to the classroom something. Look, I remembered you, and I graduated a long time ago, and I remembered your classroom. So did my brother. So did my sister-in-law. So I'm not saying it as a bad thing, but I'm you could have gone on to become a professor and been very successful.
I've heard that before. Including the man who hired me. What are you doing here? I had a master's degree. I was starting to publish things. I didn't have a doctorate. It came to that, and it's just the logistics just weren't there for that. And there were other things. There were political reasons at the time that prevented me from doing it, and that's why I stayed at Central. I started out as the youngest one. I was at the very, very bottom of the totem pole, and just by attrition, people dying or leaving, when I retired, I was at the top.
So let's talk a little bit let's talk about Thanksgiving,
Oh, okay.
We're doing that out of order on San Joaquin Spotlight.
Okay.
Thanksgiving. So we celebrate with, and I say we, majority of Americans, we celebrate it with a nice big turkey, some sides. We eat a lot, then we eat a lot again. What's the reason for this?
Well, societies have always had Thanksgiving celebrations. Since the very, very beginning, people have had these things to thank God or the gods or whatever for a marvelous harvest, victory in a war, whatever they want to celebrate. And in the English Reformation in the 16th century, when after Henry VIII broke with Rome and England became a Protestant country, At first, Catholicism was still copied in many of its customs, etc. And there were groups in the English church that didn't like that. The Puritans, for example, wanted to keep the English church but purify it of all Catholic ritual, etc. They didn't like holidays like Christmas, celebrating. They didn't see the point of celebrating this way. They didn't like that. And there were others, separatists, not the Quakers, the Pilgrims. The Pilgrims, which they weren't called Pilgrims at the time. That name came in from, it was either Longfellow or Emerson in the 1880s.
Years later.
More than 200 years later. But they are known as the Pilgrims. The Pilgrims were separatists. They wanted to be completely apart from the Church of England. So they and the Puritans were at odds. The Puritans and they were at odds with the English government, and that's, in any case, that's why they came to America in two different waves.
Sounds like a lot of drama there.
Yes. Now, here's the thing, though. You don't want a Catholic type of celebration, like as Christmas, okay? But the Pilgrims had a good harvest. They had survived. Half of them had survived for 2 or 3 years once they arrived in America, and they wanted to give thanks. They were at peace temporarily with the Indians, and they invited them to a celebration. And it wasn't in November. It was probably in September or October. They're not sure when the first one was. The records aren't that clear, but they were that much earlier. But still, the point is they were going to have a celebration, a Thanksgiving for a good harvest, for surviving, for, I guess, still being at peace. And they had this feast. And turkey was included, but it was not the main course.
So I'm going to stop you right there.
Okay.
Here, when we celebrate the turkey, everything is around the turkey.
That's right. The turkey is a god or goddess that we worship.
But you're saying back then it was not the main dish.
It was not the main dish. Wild turkey was just one of the things brought to the table. Mostly it was lobster, eel, and venison.
Wow.
Plus a bunch of different vegetables, all local vegetables. The Indians provided vegetables and so forth. It was a celebration that lasted 3 or 4 days, in fact. It wasn't just a one-shot affair. But as far as turkey is concerned, it was popular in New England. As it settled, it became something to, as a good fall or winter meat. And Thanksgiving, when first proclaimed by President Washington for our independence in 1789, he proclaimed it, the turkey, I guess, was the main attraction in New England. And I have some dates here. By 1800, it was the dish in New England. And interesting way of getting turkey to people in Boston, for example, or other New England cities where if they weren't raising them, was by turkey drives. There were, just like you've heard of cattle drives and what have you, they had turkey drives. Wild turkeys would be gathered, and a drover would move them along, and there were some other, he had assistants, and they went about a mile an hour. And they could be distracted by horses going by or something. A carriage going by would distract them. They might try to scatter. That's why the drover had assistants to try to bring them back together. Well, at nighttime, because you're not going to get very far at a mile an hour, at nighttime, the turkeys, wild turkeys, could fly. They'd fly up into a tree, and they'd stay there while the drover, I guess, slept, and his assistants made sure no other animals or people came and took them. In the morning, seeds and stuff would be scattered, so the turkeys would fly back down for that.
Interesting sight this must have been.
Yeah, then they'd round them up again and move them. See, turkeys today are bred to be fat, and they're artificially bred for this. and they get fattened, and some up to 40 pounds.
Wow.
Naturally, they don't fly. Not at that rate, they don't. And they've been more bred for white breast meat, which personally I don't care for. I prefer the dark thigh meat. I do. It's much juicier to me, but that's, you know, I don't speak for the American market. This changed around 1830, 1840, when you started to have railroads, and they would move the turkeys in cages to the market in Boston, to the meat market there. And in other parts of the country, Thanksgiving didn't really take off for a while. That wasn't really until after the Civil War. Now, in 1863, President Lincoln proclaimed a Thanksgiving holiday. He was the first one to do that, and it became a subject of a presidential proclamation really for the rest of our history. It wasn't until the late 1930s when Franklin Roosevelt pushed it into as a real national holiday, a day off work holiday, etc. And he, to help in the Depression, moved Thanksgiving one Thursday earlier. There were in 1939, there were 5 Thursdays instead of the usual 4. And so he figured, hey, merchants would like it. One of the owners of Macy's said, yeah, convinced him, do this. And so, okay, he moved it up. He moved it up to a week earlier. But there were complaints. The Republicans especially complained about, about that for whatever reason. And it was back and forth, back and forth. It's sort of silly. But in 1942, it was set at the 4th Thursday in November. And that, of course, led to we know now as Black Friday, which is a whole nother thing. Now, in the 19th century, Black Friday or Black Any Day referred to a big economic crash.
Interesting.
A big economic crash. It was negative. But starting in the 60s, I found this out. In Philadelphia, police started to call the day after Thanksgiving Black Friday because of all of the traffic, the increased heavy traffic,
Interesting.
of pedestrian and vehicle. But I checked on something even as late as about 1985 or 1990 in the LA Times. People on the West Coast hadn't heard of it. So, but the term it just developed. It just evolved so that we know now what it is. And the point of it today, as we all know, is to be crazy.
Well, and there are sales that day.
That's the whole idea. See? The point is to move merchants who may have been in the red, negative, all year long, into the black, positive, finally, if they get good sales. For most years, until maybe about, as I recall, at least in the 20th century, and even into the start of this century, the stores weren't open on Thanksgiving Day. They weren't open until 7 or 8 in the morning on the day after. But now you see them opening even Thanksgiving afternoon, which leads to a lot of the workers didn't like that. They didn't like that. And we all know how wild people are, how many crimes are committed. I mean, people commit crimes over this sort of thing, assault and battery, robbery in some cases. It's a madness, but it's here, and it's not just here. Other countries have it too. It's spread to other countries. I saw in Canada, in Mexico, even in India. A lot of which doesn't celebrate Christmas or Thanksgiving, but they have this one day, for this big, grab sales. And, well, that's part of the tradition now.
Well, and what is it? I mean, we know we give thanks on Thanksgiving. My family does.
Sure,
I do.
We all do.
But what else is it? I mean, what do you think we should be doing on that day other than, is it just giving thanks, but is there something else we should be doing or remembering on that day?
We should remember why we're giving thanks. America, although there are some out there who would disagree, America is still a free country. And one of the things, compared to others, we know it is. One of the things we were always thankful for was that we were not ruled by kings. We could pick our leaders. Whether we liked them or not was a different story. If we didn't like them enough, we could get rid of them after so many years. We could pick our leaders. We had no kings. We had opportunity. We weren't set by classes. We could rise or fall on our own. And also, very few people have to starve in this country. And even the poor people, even the poor, have feasts provided by churches and by other charitable groups. Here in Fresno, for example, we know that at the Poverello House and at the Rescue Mission, what have you. They provide this for the poor. So people don't have to starve here. It's something else to be thankful for. You don't have the famine here. And we're free. Essentially, we are free. We're free to say what we please in many cases. And many of us have personal things to be thankful for. I'm sure you do this year.
I do.
And we do, personally. Many people do. This is a time to remember, to give thanks. We have whether people want to accept, believe or not, give thanks to God was the whole purpose originally of this. And from the beginning of the Republic, always, to give thanks to the Almighty, give thanks to God. Okay, this is it.
And one of the things that many of us are thankful for, if not all of us, is in fact this great country that we live in. And we thank our soldiers. So shifting gears a little bit, in November we also celebrate Veterans Day. So tell us a little bit about Veterans Day and a little bit of background on that.
Well, Veterans Day used to be Armistice Day. Mm-hmm. I remember when it was. I was a little kid when they changed it. I think I was in third grade probably when they changed it in 1954. It was originally Armistice Day to celebrate, not so much celebrate, to commemorate the end of World War I. When the German Empire surrendered on November the 11th, 1918. It was the end of the biggest war the world or our country had ever seen. Now, more Americans had died in the Civil War than died in World War I. And that's not the point. The point is this was a significantly bigger war, even for the United States. And the year after, on November the 11th, 1919, President Wilson proclaimed a day of remembrance for Armistice Day, to remember the brave men who died in the service. Okay. In the mid-20s, around 1925 or 26, President Coolidge issued another Armistice Day proclamation. And it was always observed, but just like days, we have different commemorative days on the calendar all the time that we don't, well, we have Valentine's Day, for example, but it's not a holiday. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
We have
St. Patrick's Day is another one.
Day is another one. We acknowledge it, we observe it, if we like. Halloween. But these aren't really holidays where you take off work or take off school or anything like that. But then in 1939, ironic since a new world war would be starting, no, 1938, since a new world war would be starting the next year, Congress passed a resolution, law, making Armistice Day a national holiday. Big change from what it had been, just an acknowledged day, now an official day.
And what you're saying is equivalent to like Valentine's Day, everybody's staying home, or St. Patrick's Day, everybody's staying home, or not everybody, but
Yeah.
the government businesses and some
Banks
businesses
and government
closed.
and mail and everything is shut down. Yes, that's what I'm saying. Well, after World War II, immediately after World War II, in 1945, a man, a veteran in Alabama, I have his name here, Raymond Weeks, Weeks. Raymond Weeks suggested that Armistice Day, that was for the first war. A lot of us just served in this one.
Yeah,
You
yeah.
know, how about having a Veterans Day to honor all American servicemen? He went to General Eisenhower, who suggested it to Ike, and Ike said, "Yeah, that's a good idea. That's a good idea. Why not?" He was fine with it, and there was some lobbying in Congress. It went on for a few years, and finally, in 1954, it was changed to Veterans Day. And how to spell that? Well, if it's the official spelling, the government spelling, is without the apostrophe S. The rest of us usually, stores and others usually use the apostrophe S. It doesn't matter. Veterans Day, either one is fine. I understand. I checked on that. Either one is acceptable. But it's a federal holiday, as it was since it was armistice since 1938. It's a federal holiday. It's a holiday in many states also. I think almost all of the states observe it as a state holiday. In any case, schools, banks, and all government offices, federal offices and government offices in those states that recognize it are closed. Probably there was a survey by the Human Resources Committee that found that about 20% of employers, private employers, give the day off. But otherwise, it's a day given to sales and what have you.
Like I asked you with Thanksgiving, on that day, a lot of people get excited because they're home.
Right.
A lot of students get excited because
they're
school,
off,
they're
yes.
off. And so what should we be remembering on that day other than, okay, I have a day off.
Yeah, I know.
I'm staying home.
I know, and this is another point too. In 1970, the Uniform Monday Holiday Act was passed, which moved many, many holidays to the nearest Monday. And Veterans Day became the last Monday in October. Just another holiday, 3-day weekend, another 3-day weekend.
Woohoo, 3 days.
Yeah, I know. The veterans organizations were absolutely pissed about this. They went ballistic about this. And hey, we are not just the subject of another 3-day, beer drinking holiday. Come on now, we did something. And they pressured it, and finally in what year did it go back to it? In 1978, it went back to November 11th, no matter what day of the week it falls on.
Well, and that's interesting because I don't think a lot of people know that. That's an interesting fact there.
But I remember that. Yeah, it's a 3-day weekend too. But yeah, should we think about? What should we remember? We should acknowledge the men and women now who fight our wars, who have fought, and who are fighting our wars. Well, not really. Veterans are those who have fought. Okay. This to be distinguished from Memorial Day. Memorial Day is for those who died in service.
So, and that's a key difference that I'm glad you brought up. So Memorial Day, those who've died.
That's right.
Veterans Day, those who've served.
Right. Living or dead, but those who've served. And they have usually parades and what have you in many, many, many communities. It's an important day for any of us who've spent any time in it. And in the service. And I'm proud of my own status, and I'm sure most others are too.
And you've served in the military.
Yeah, I have, but I don't go into that now.
Interesting.
Okay.
That's so interesting. I didn't, I was your student and family members were your student, but I don't believe I've ever known that you went to the service. So thank you for your service.
You're welcome. But I didn't give an iota of how much other people have given. You see what I'm saying? So I never took much credit for it. I didn't take credit for it because I didn't serve in combat, and well, that's another story for another day. Okay.
Well, we have a few minutes left on the program, and so if you would have, I mean, going back to your teaching, if you would have, would you have given that up for anything else? I mean, looking back at it, just briefly, are you glad you did what you did?
You mean as a teacher?
As a teacher?
Sure. Looking back on it, yeah, I am. I think I had some kind of influence, positive influence. The fact I'm here tonight at your invitation shows I must have. A lot of times a teacher cannot know if what he or she has done means anything, has had any real effect.
And that's a good point. You can't gauge it.
Can't gauge it, you know. I'm not that old, despite everything, but I'm not going to live forever.
Well, Mr. Genini, we are out of time this week on the program. Thank you so much for coming. You're San Joaquin Spotlight's resident expert. You know, we bring you on to
I appreciate that.
Tell us a little bit about, you know, detail about what we know. You're the one that comes on and tells us more about those days and stuff like that.
But to finish off what I was saying, though, you're an example of one of my successes. You see,
Thank you for that.
There.
Thank you for
I
that.
know that. I know that.
That's all for this edition of San Joaquin Spotlight. To the volunteer crew that make this production and every production possible, we couldn't do this without you. They're in the studio now making this program what it is. Thank you to our audience members listening to 90.7 FM, KFSR Fresno, and to those watching the CMAC channel. We're broadcasting here from CMAC Studios. Tune in to Comcast 93 and AT&T 99 for this broadcast and other creative and interesting broadcasts. I'm your host, Sevag Tateosian. Tune in next week to a new edition.